yet.
90 degrees. Of course, then you're facing the camera.
So I ended up having to work a little bit yesterday too. So
Or-
she's working 2 to 8 today, and I'm like, wow.
I'll just do this because I don't really feel like changing it.
I don't have Frank's phone number. I could call him.
Oh, it's okay. He can see us right now.
Okay.
It's no big deal. The room was, the chairs are, I'm not going to mess with those anyway, so
We would love it.
Yeah.
this is fine.
Okay.
There she are.
I don't like change.
Busy lady.
Hi, Amber.
I don't like change either.
Yeah, I'm resistant to change.
Going, right?
Yes.
Yes, let me get you before you pick up that cup of coffee.
Whatever.
Why don't you like change? You always like change.
I mean, I guess
You change every day.
it just depends. I embrace change. I'll have to analyze myself and figure out where the
Said he was.
DMZ is for that. I'm not real sure.
I have no idea.
Oh, Frank had actually already texted me.
And she was such a pleasant lady.
Yeah.
Okay, we're
It's
gonna
good,
have
Frank.
other people on our side today.
Okay.
So I think you'll move over one aisle.
If I just did the middle, the organ end of the middle, or no, there's 4.
So
So,
whoever is in the
Where do you
first
want to put the
position
podium?
would
No,
go
it's
by
fine.
the
I was talking to it again. I
And
said it's
then
fine. I mean, I don't want
the
to.
second person will go
I don't
the
want to go
next
through all the
aisle.
fuss of
The
changing.
third person will go the next aisle.
well, we can,
Or-
it's
and
not a
then the
big
other
deal.
side is
Where
gonna-
do you want to put it?
I've got
Well, I would just put it back where it
Um,
was, and then we could just spread some chairs out. But
Sandra.
this actually makes
And
more
I
sense,
walked her
Frank.
through
So
where
let's
she's
just leave
supposed
it.
to be, and then
I'm
Doug
just
will
like I
take
said,
the
I'm
one that's
resistant to
closest
change.
to
So
that.
even if I'm irrational, I'm immediately
Where
going to
the
be like,
choir
"What is
used to
happening
be.
here?"
Because the choir's going to be in the audience today.
Okay,
Oh.
and, presumably it's just one day. One
Right? No, it's no
So
problem.
we'll be back to normal, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm just stubborn. So
You might
Mine.
give them a clue that they're gonna be moving pretty soon.
And so Doug will have
for Sunday
his-
school, well, I just sent out an email this morning. You're actually CC'd on it simply because you do this work.
Uh-huh.
So if you check your email, I sent
Okay.
out an email this morning to
You-
Melody and addressing Melody and Robert, but I have you and Sean and Rory on there as well.
Okay,
So we'll see what happens.
okay, very good.
But yeah, you're right.
And
Need
Well-
to tell these people that too.
and maybe Jim, I'm hoping Jim will be here. But if Jim's
I got a
not
few
here,
minutes.
then we may put me here and somebody else here.
Okay. Adrian, or is this your decoration, Bobby?
Yeah, it is.
You got a plan?
That's our plan, and we're sticking to it. Because the choir is gonna be in the audience, I wanted to have one more person helping us get on the floor, because they'll be busier on the floor.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, what's the occasion? It's too hot in the choir lounge?
No, have you been in there? It's
Oh.
all decorated.
Okay.
And, of course,
Hello, Sharon.
Kim.
so, John Ray never does anything small.
Yeah.
So it's way big
Okay.
decorations,
Okay.
not little bitty decorations.
Where are you talking about? Down
In the sanctuary.
sanctuary? Yeah.
The Cecil B. DeMille production.
Yes, yes. He doesn't do anything in small parts.
Thank goodness it's not the Red Sea.
Right. But it's beautiful. He did an awesome job. They all did a great job of decorating. And those little cacti are so cute.
Yeah. Rick, you getting tired of not working?
Not yet.
Not yet.
I actually do still teach a little bit, but I haven't worked in the last couple of weeks, so.
Mm. Well,
Are
Larry.
you sliding into retirement the slow way?
No, I'm running pretty fast into it, like I said.
Oh, okay.
Couple of hours one week, and an hour the next week, and not even the week after that.
Oh, so you are
Yeah.
slamming on the brakes there.
Well, the Friday after, your good friend Larry and Terry misread the map and our 9.4 became 11 miles. Larry went.
Rounding.
And Larry
He's an economist.
He went to the zoo. He's a volunteer, and he stands at some place and talks. You know,
Yeah, imagine.
well, he talked himself in a good case of COVID,
Oh, goodness.
even though having the shots.
Being outside.
And I would imagine Larry, as you know, Larry liked to talk, and he doesn't like to talk from a distance with someone. So we suspect that, I don't know if it was COVID, Omicron, whatever, but he said Tuesday he started to feel really funky. So then Wednesday he got tested positive. Terry and I got out our test kits. We weren't, so we think he picked it up, you know, and Omicron or whatever is out there, it's on the rise in this area. I don't know if he had his mask on, or I doubt if he did. That would kind of retard his communication technique.
Well, you think outside it wouldn't be an issue. So.
I don't know.
Well, unless you get close.
And
I
lots of
have a
people go to the
tendency to
zoo.
be close, so I can't say anything bad about it.
Well, I didn't hear from him Friday. Terry went to Atlanta, so I guess he's still alive. I'm sorry.
I'm sure you'll hear from him.
Larry who?
Larry Blair is a hiking buddy of Terry Dawn. And Larry is retired, and he's a fellow ORAU employee.
Yeah.
Rick and Larry were together, what, 20 years?
Oh, gosh. Seemed like forever, but that's just being with Larry.
Yes, I understand.
It could have been a year, right?
Well, I've been friends with Terry since the 70s, early 70s.
Terry was my neighbor back in.
Yeah, for a while up on Iroquois.
Yeah.
But Larry never stops, never. And in between words, there's audible pauses. You can
At least he keeps you entertained on your hike.
Those are the type of people that I just say hi.
And he doesn't, he has to be first, and he goes out front. He doesn't stay with Terry and me.
Oh,
And I get in the middle, because those two guys have longer legs, and they take off. So I hold up Terry, and Terry and I have a conversation. Larry's out
How's
there.
Terry doing?
Larry.
hey, how's Terry doing?
Doing what? See us? Well, you don't get the Oak Ridger.
No.
He's big time. They have a history museum in the old Wildcat Den.
Oh,
Yeah, I haven't been to that yet, but
He's the prez.
Sorry, my phone was caught.
sorry.
all right, I'll get started on the announcements. It's pretty much 10 o'clock.
Somewhere.
What's that? Yeah, somewhere. It's 10 o'clock somewhere. That's right. Passport Kids Camp meeting is today after the worship service in room 105. So that's already here. Vacation Bible School, which is what's that? Tomorrow.
Yeah.
Tomorrow through the June 6th through the 9th, from 6 p.m. till 9 p.m. And you can still register for that online at www.firstbaptistvbs.org. Or if you're here, there's a form in the lobby that you can use for registration. June 11th, coming up, Saturday, June 11th, is First Baptist Church's turn to do pickups for the Ecumenical Storehouse, where we pick up donated household items and bring them to the storehouse. And we do that between 9 a.m. and noon on our designated Saturdays.
Didn't you just come off a month of that?
Well,
We do it every,
we do have a month that we staff
Okay.
each year, but we have a Saturday every month
I see.
that we volunteer specifically for the pickups.
Okay.
Take the truck out. and bring the stuff back to the storehouse. The Passport Youth Camp meeting, different from the Passport Kids Camp meeting, for youth and parents is on the 12th. That's also a Sunday after worship, and it's going to be up here rather than in room 105. There's a church council meeting that same Sunday, June 12th at 2 p.m. in room 105. And benevolence. Okay. So this is saw some emails about this. There's a benevolence policy writing team meeting on Tuesday, June 21st at 6:30 p.m. in room 105. If you're part of the benevolence policy writing team, I assume that you're aware of that membership, and so you'll want to be at this meeting on Tuesday, June 21st. And then again, the nightlife groups are coming up in August. I think they're really trying to hammer down, who's going to lead the book study and who's going to offer up their homes for people to meet in, for these small groups to meet in. And then they're going to have a book study for this Jen Hatmaker's Simple and Free.
And this study will be in August?
In August is when these groups start. So yes, this I guess they're kicking it off with this particular book. I'm not sure, how that was chosen or whatever, but that's the book they're gonna. Makes it easy when you're just told what to do, right? At least it is for me. So, but if you'd like to volunteer or to lead a discussion, please notify the church office. Just tell somebody that you want to do it, and so we can have that ready to go in August. And that's all that we have on the bulletin. So classroom's a little different today. The angle of the camera is a little different if you're watching. We had to move things around for VBS, and so I apologize because I was in here complaining when I first walked in because I'm resistant to change, and so Frank came up here and wasted his time. But anyway, one of the ancient Stoic philosophers once said, "Never let anyone see or hear you complaining." And I would really like to be able to follow that. But I'm a big fan of Stoicism, but that's a hard one to do. But just think of all the consequences that come from complaining in front of others. You know what I mean? You automatically either drag someone in or you're dragged in. And just think if you just avoided it altogether. Not complaining, everybody's going to complain. But doing it, letting other people see you, I think that's a wise thing to try to put into practice. But my good
suggestions provided to try to assist you. Normally, you don't take advantage.
Right. My goodness, I think it's hard to not complain. I've gotten too used to it, to complaining out loud anyway. So we'll go ahead and open in prayer, and then we'll get started with the Sunday school lesson. Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much for another opportunity to gather together in your name, to talk about you, to think about you, to just think about the implications of your word and what we see in the natural world. We just pray that you would bless us and help us to grow in our knowledge and our ability to talk to you about others. And we just pray that you be with each of us today, not only for Sunday school, but in our worship service, and just accept these things, accept our worship, accept our praise, and we give you all the praise. And we pray in Jesus' name, amen. Amen. All right, so last week we wrapped up our discussion of some, philosophical arguments for the existence of God. We're in this section of natural theology where we're looking at we're looking at the cosmic order, we're looking at, we're doing philosophy, we're looking at science, these sort of things to find evidence and arguments and form arguments for the existence of God without appealing to the Bible or to special revelation or anything. These are just things that we can grasp from the natural world and how we exist in it. Last week, the philosophical arguments basically, we concluded that God is the best explanation for the existence of the universe. We looked at the argument from contingency, which contends that God is the best explanation for the existence of the universe. We then looked at the Kalam cosmological argument, which contends that the universe, has a cause of its beginning. In other words, the existence of the universe can't be explained away by just appealing to an eternally existing universe, which we saw by exploring the concept of the existence of an actual infinity. Today we're going to look at some of the scientific evidence for the beginning of the universe. So we're moving on from these philosophical arguments to some arguments from scientific evidence. And we actually have pretty strong evidence for the beginning of the universe. We're still on this topic of the universe and its existence and that sort of thing. But we're going to look at scientific evidence at this point. So again, we have pretty strong evidence for the beginning of the universe, and so this kind of the scientific evidence for this works as a kind of confirmation for the conclusion that's reached through the philosophical arguments. Given the scientific evidence that we currently have, we can reasonably say that it is more probable than not that the universe did have a beginning. This is especially true given the advent of the Big Bang model of the evolution of the universe, and then also this discovery that the universe is expanding and that sort of thing. So we'll begin by looking at this stuff, particularly at the expansion of the universe. For most of history, people have assumed that the universe is just static and unchanging, that it's just there. Even Albert Einstein, when he first began to develop his theory of his gravitational theory, which we know was the theory of general relativity. Even during this time, Einstein was under the assumption, he worked under the assumption that the universe was just static and unchanging and eternal. And that's been the belief for most of history. But when Einstein began to apply these equations that he was working on to the universe as a whole, the math started not working out so good. It didn't, something was off. The math actually showed that the universe was either expanding or it was contracting, but it wasn't sitting still. Then fast forward a few years, you get into the early 20s, and you have there was a Russian mathematician by the name of Alexander Friedman and a Belgian astronomer by the name of Georges Lemaire. And these two guys independently discovered models of the universe by taking Einstein's equations at face value. They said, okay, Einstein's equations are correct. Let's construct a model of the universe. And what pretty cool, both Friedman and Lemaire, again working independently, they arrived at these models of the universe that are expanding. It's not static. So Einstein's equations, even though he saw them as something was wrong, but if you took them at face value, these guys came up with an expanding universe, not a static or unchanging universe. So then, in 1921, observations made by the American astronomer Edwin Hubble, as we're all familiar with, his observations confirmed Friedman and Lemaire's theory. When Hubble discovered that galaxies are slowly moving away from one another, and they did this by observing the electromagnetic energy, particularly light, from those galaxies. And what Hubble discovered was that that electromagnetic energy, those light waves, it's lengthening, and as they get longer and longer and further away, they get redder in color. So you might have heard of the red shift in the galaxies, and that's where that term came from. As the distance between galaxies increases, the light appears redder. And so the term redshift was coined to describe that phenomenon. So this red shift in the light from those galaxies occurs as a result of the expansion of the universe. Space itself is expanding. So the galaxies themselves are not expanding. Galaxies are static. They're sitting in the same place. They're not stretching, but they move away from themselves as the universe expands, as space itself expands. And so a good illustration that I saw for visualizing this is to just imagine you have a deflated balloon and you glued a bunch of little buttons to it, and then you blow the balloon up. All the buttons are stuck in place where you glued them, but the distance between them grows as you blow more air into the balloon. That's a pretty good way of thinking about how the expansion of the universe works. It's happening right now. And so that's how galaxies are in space. They're like those buttons. They're at rest with respect to space, but moving away from one another as space itself expands. Excuse me, my throat's dry. So following Hubble's findings, Einstein, realized that the expansion of the universe, that his equations originally indicated, must be accurate. And so he changed his position. He wasn't that stubborn. He was willing to change his mind if the evidence, if the evidence was there. So before then, though, Einstein had been, again, unwilling to accept that the universe was expanding, simply because he and many others were just operating on the assumption that the universe was static. They had never known otherwise. And so he created what is called, in order to do this, in order to keep the universe static with his equations, he basically fudged the numbers a little bit. He created what's now called Einstein's cosmological constant, which allowed him to counterbalance the effect of gravity and achieve a static universe. What's funny, though, is Einstein was so brilliant that even this thing he made up to fudge the numbers, it became like a true scientific principle that's used today. So, I mean, it's mind-blowing sometimes how smart these people are, that even the stuff they make up to make the math work turns into a something we rely on today that's used in physics today, but or cosmology. But this cosmological constant again allowed him to counterbalance those numbers, or fudge the numbers, as some would say, to eliminate the results that indicated an expanding universe.
Yeah, some people call it Einstein's fudge factor.
Yes, that's actually, I was trying to think of that. That's what it's referred to as, Einstein's fudge factor. But
even his fudge factors are brilliant.
Right, exactly. That's what I was trying to get at. Even his fudge factor was brilliant, and it came full circle and is now still used because it makes sense. Einstein drummed it up. It wasn't just total nonsense. But supposedly Einstein later called the introduction of this cosmological constant for this purpose his biggest blunder. He regretted, holding on to a static universe. But again, he
Who was he to argue with whole of history?
Right. Yeah. Who was he to argue? And he, although his math was so good, he had to have been tempted. But regardless, whenever the evidence came, he changed his position, and he had to let that go. But he could have potentially predicted the expansion of the universe, much earlier, and before it was observed, and then he would have been credited with. Although technically his math is what allowed people to predict it, so he still plays a role. He still gets some credit. Einstein doesn't just not get kudos. But as we noted, using Einstein's equations, Friedman and Lemaire were able to develop the model of the expanding universe. And this is eventually what has come to be known as the Big Bang model of the universe, the Big Bang theory. I try not to say the Big Bang theory so much because it makes me think of the television show.
Yeah.
I immediately am like Sheldon Cooper. I love that show though. But when I was typing up these notes, I would always type Big Bang theory, and then I'd go back and change it to model or something. But anyway, but the Big Bang model is the prevailing model of how the universe evolved today. It's often referred to as the standard model of cosmology. And so, if you watch any, Discovery Channel, any sort of science-based TV, or read popular scientific books, popular level science books and stuff, or some of you might read academic stuff. I don't know. I can't do it. I don't know how to digest it. I'm not smart enough. But, watching Discovery Channel, just looking at all the stuff coming, that we're constantly finding and learning, it looks like cosmology is just this ever, growing and evolving field of science, and it is. and there's always these new observations and being made and things like that. But even with all that, it's pretty wild to think that these underlying mathematical framework that was laid down by these guys in the 20s and 30s, that is still the bedrock for all of it. It's the foundational understanding that all this other stuff is built on, and it's holding. It just works. We should point out, with the Big Bang, that the name can be a little misleading, because if you're like me, anytime I try to imagine the Big Bang, I just imagine this big explosion. Everything's black, and then there's this big explosion, and galaxies and time and space and all of this kind of comes into being. But that's not really the correct way to understand how the Big Bang or how the expansion of the universe works. For one, an explosion is something that happens within space. There's matter and things involved, and but with the Big Bang, what we're talking about is the boundary point from which time and space and everything comes to be how we understand it now. But there was no space before the Big Bang. So imagining that galaxies being pushed out into this pre-existing dark space would be a misunderstanding, since what we're describing is the inception of space itself. So that just makes it impossible to visualize the Big Bang, and so I still just visualize it the same way. But as you trace this expansion back in time, the galaxies will get closer and closer and closer together. And eventually the distance between any of the 2 points just becomes absolute zero. And that's just hard to even fathom, but you can't get any closer than that. So at that point, you have reached the boundary of space and time. Space and time can't be extended any further back than that. It's literally the beginning of the universe. So that's what all is wrapped up in this idea, this Big Bang model of the evolution of the universe. So the Big Bang is really just describing this notion that in the past the universe was, denser and hotter than it ever has been since. And that's it. That's what's being talked about. That's what's being described when we call it the Big Bang. But at that initial boundary point, there is nothing prior to it. There's nothing prior to the beginning of the universe. So you don't want to try, like I do when I'm visualizing, you don't want to try to think of nothing as something, because that can be misleading. We talked about this not too long ago. How the word nothing is a term of universal negation. It just literally means not anything, which is hard to fathom. So when we say there was nothing before the Big Bang or prior to that initial boundary point, it means there was not anything, not space, not time, nothing. So in contrast to the, that age-old idea of this unchanging eternal universe, the Big Bang Theory predicts an absolute beginning to the universe. And again, today, the Big Bang is the most widely held theory of how the universe evolved. It's the prevailing model. And so if that is correct, then we have pretty awesome evidence for the beginning of the universe, for the truth of the second premise of the Kalam cosmological argument, that the universe began to exist. And so we can say with great confidence that the best evidence of contemporary science confirms the universe began to exist. Another indication of the expanding of the expansion of the universe was discovered back in 1964, 1965 by a couple of scientists at Bell Labs. These were radio astronomers, and these guys were using this huge antenna in New Jersey, and they were trying to measure the radio signals between galaxies and the space between galaxies out there. And what they discovered, though, filtering out all these other noises and stuff, what they discovered was
it's
that...
soaking up all the bird poop.
Yes, that's funny. I wasn't going to mention that, but that's funny. So we'll get to what Gary just mentioned, but what they discovered was just this constant buzzing noise. They couldn't escape it. No matter where they pointed this thing, they just heard this constant noise. And at one point in time, they actually thought it was pigeons pooping on the antenna, because there was a problem with pigeons roosting up. I wish I had a picture of this thing. It looks like a huge horn.
It's a big antenna.
Yeah, it was like 50 feet long, but 20 by 20 at its whatever you call it, aperture. But yeah, so at one point, I mean, they literally, you know, they literally pulled out all the stops on trying to figure out what might be causing this buzzing noise. Well, it turns out they had made a profound discovery, and had confirmed something that was predicted about 20 years earlier. And what they discovered, you know, we call cosmic microwave background radiation. And so and they discovered it pretty much by accident. Again, they were just trying to detect these radio signals out there in the space between the galaxies. And they just kept running into this noise. And as they tried to figure out what the noise was, including, you know, possible pigeon poop, what they ended up realizing was that they discovered cosmic microwave background radiation. The important thing about this, about CMB for short, so I don't have to say that every time, is that it helps solidify the accuracy of the Big Bang model of the universe. The cosmic microwave background radiation is the leftovers of the Big Bang. So it can't be seen with the naked eye, but it's everywhere in the universe. And one thing I didn't know, I was reading an article. You can actually see cosmic microwave background radiation if you have a television that's old enough. And some of you guys may know this. I'm not trying to say you're old enough, because I'm old enough to remember this. I just didn't realize that I was watching cosmic microwave background radiation on my television. So on the old analog televisions, and apparently channel 3 was one that was unused. It was like in between channels. So if you took an old enough television, you know, before cable or anything, and you put it on channel 3, which I didn't remember that, but you remember seeing the channels that were just static, or snow as they called it? Yeah, the snow. That's what it was always referred to in my home. And I think I had this television in every house when I was a kid, but I just always remember it at my grandparents' house, specifically my paternal grandparents' house, my dad's mom and dad's house in South Knoxville. They had one of those, you know, the television was a piece of furniture. It was like the size of this thing,
Yes.
with a screen in the middle. And, you know, I was the remote control when I visited. But for whatever, you know, you get to a channel where it was just in the snow. So that snow, that channel, now it's a lots of things. It's lots of man-made signals and radiation that's getting picked up, and some other natural forms of radiation in the world. But from what I read, that only accounted for about 1% of that snow. The rest of it, if you were to filter out all the man-made signals, all the other radiation coming from other natural sources, the rest of it is just the cosmic microwave background radiation from the Big Bang, from the beginning of the expansion of the universe. And so you're seeing the Big Bang's leftovers on a television. You'd literally be watching the cosmic microwave background of the universe if you put it on channel 3 and filtered out that 1% of man-made and other radiation sources.
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty cool.
If the universe is continuing to expand, are we not creating more of the static radiation?
See why I said CMB?
Yeah.
The answer to that is I don't know, because I don't know. I'm not sure if, I don't think you're not creating any more cosmic microwave background radiation. You just, bam, the universe is filled with it from the Big Bang. There's not any more of that. Now we're creating all kinds of radiation that's, and I don't know about the other natural sources. But that stuff is just there from the inception of the universe. And, I don't think the expansion of the universe, I don't think any more is being created. It's the source of that particular radiation is, did its thing, and it's done, and it's just everywhere. Okay. As far as I know, from what I remember reading. But there are problems with even so the question is, when it comes to the Big Bang model, the standard model of cosmology, is it correct? And as I said, it is the prevailing view. It's called the standard model for a reason. So, even though it was kind of laid out there in the 20s and 30s, that is still the operating assumption for all scientists for how the universe, it has evolved. But there are some, does that predict the beginning of the universe? Not just how it evolved from these initial conditions, but does the Big Bang theory actually, is it correct, and does it predict the beginning of the universe? And so, despite all the evidence from like the red shift that was observed by Hubble and the cosmic microwave background radiation that those guys at Bell Labs discovered and that sort of thing, we've only continued to confirm basically that the universe did have a beginning. But there are some mysteries that are still have not been unraveled even by the Big Bang model of the universe's evolution. So the thing is as you trace, the further back you go, starting with kind of where we are now with the expansion of the universe, it gets to the point where it shrinks down to just subatomic levels. And at that point, Einstein's general theory of relativity, it doesn't really it doesn't work. They don't really know how to apply that to the universe back in those, when it was in that at those subatomic levels. And so at that point, you start getting into things like quantum physics and those sorts of things. And so what will ultimately have to be done is to take Einstein's theory and quantum physics and marry them up and make them work together to come up with a theory that would combine these two, that could describe like the very that first split second of the universe. And the problem is that no one knows how to do this. This theory does not exist. No one, they're working on it, and there's people have ideas, but nothing's been put out there that's tenable, that's supportable. As one astrophysicist that I was reading after, he's like, this is, the answer that question and collect your Nobel Prize, so that's where we're at really with cosmology today. So the standard model, the Big Bang theory, it still needs to be tinkered with in order for it to be empirically adequate all the way back to the actual that boundary point, that first split second of the universe. Now, there's been lots of other models put out there for, the universe and its evolution and that sort of thing. But none of the other proposed models that avoid, so lots of scientists have put out models. People really want there to not be a beginning of the universe, because then you escape this problem of God, right? You don't really escape the problem of God, but you can at least say, well, God didn't create the universe. We know, and they have these models where once you go so far back, it contracts. Well, then it expanded again into the past, and so it's like an oscillating model. It's constantly, expanding and contracting and that sort of thing. But from what I understand, I'm not smart enough to describe those models to you and how they work. But from what I understand, they're not tenable. They fall apart pretty easy. You can tear them apart pretty easy. They just don't work. And the only non-standard models that have been put forward that are somewhat tenable, that are viable, all of those have a beginning have a beginning for the universe, an absolute beginning where the past is not infinite but it's finite. And so Dr. Craig, who I was basically reading his note, and he's the one I'm following for this Sunday school series. He sums this up nicely. He says, in one sense, the history of 20th century cosmology can be seen as a parade of one failed attempt after another to avoid the absolute beginning predicted by the standard model. That prediction has now stood for nearly 100 years through a period of enormous advances in observational astronomy and creative theoretical work in astrophysics. So basically, for all the effort we've put into these things, no one has been able to come up with a solution that's stronger or more, that has more explanatory power, explanatory scope, and that sort of thing than the standard model, the Big Bang theory, and Sheldon Cooper. Just popped into my head again. So that's it. That's next week. We're going to talk about another a second scientific argument for the beginning of the universe. We'll look at it from a different perspective, and that's basically how the universe continues to expand and is eventually going to die, and a slow heat death, and everything in it's going to go with it, and so that'll be a depressing discussion that we'll have in next week's Sunday school. But
They know it's expanding, you said, from the redness. And
yeah,
the theory is, where's the energy? What is the magnetic force, centrifugal, suns? They come up with anything that, other than
Space
saying
itself.
the energy from the Big Bang, that
Yeah.
it's still proliferating and
Mhm.
pushing things away from one another.
yep,
As I understand the theory, they're expanding because space is expanding.
right.
Space doesn't need any force to make it grow. It's just it was set in motion and it's growing.
That's
Nothing
correct.
Contains space.
Space.
Right.
Right. There isn't the thought of containing space is misleading, because space isn't contained in anything. There's nothing besides space. Space is the container. And you're right, Gary. It's what continues to, that's what we were talking about, the balloon. Picture the balloon as space, and that's it.
That's the mystery that
And the
we
glue- and
don't
the-
understand.
And the buttons we glued onto the balloon are the galaxies. So the galaxies are always in that same spot, but they grow further and further away because space itself is expanding.
Well, if you're good at writing government grant requests, you could probably make a living off trying to explain it.
Oh,
I mean, lots of people that do.
Yeah, I have footnotes of plenty of people who are trying to make a living off explaining this.
This lesson
Endnotes.
reminds me, I think it was Mark Twain said, a beautiful theory attacked by brutal facts.
Yeah. Well, that's a lot of those. Like Stephen Hawking. He's come up with he came up with a model that tried to escape. He actually came up with a model that would try to escape like just an absolute beginning, where instead of the universe looking like a cone with a very sharp point, it's rounded at the bottom. And I can't remember how to explain why that even matters, to be honest with you. But I just remember looking at the diagram. But, lots of people have wanted to get away from the beginning, an absolute beginning of the universe, because of the implication, whether it's God or something else. But again, I do know that none of those models they're kind of like how you just described, Twain's quote there, a great idea, but brute facts just it doesn't work. Not at least from what we know. But there have been other models, that do. But again, all the models that seem to work and seem to to stand up to as much scrutiny as the standard model, they all have an absolute beginning. So you're not getting away from that. There is no model where there's just an infinite past. None of those models have been able to survive the scrutiny of science. So. Yeah. All right. We'll talk more. Yes, Joy, go ahead. Oh, we're good. Yeah.
All right. Well, so maybe you did this before I arrived late, but could you zoom out? I mean, so this presumably is supposed to be in the context of an argument for the existence of God.
Well, yes, it is ultimately for our discussion. It is, because what we're arguing for is that the universe had a beginning.
Right. And then what? Like, if the universe had a beginning, then what?
Then you have to explain that.
Okay,
What
and
is
then
the
explanation.
what is the best explanation for the beginning of the universe? What's the best explanation for it, and what's the cause of it? And as we talked about with like the argument from contingency, the universe is contingent. It could have not existed, and so then you have to what created it, since it's contingent? It didn't have to exist, so why does it exist? So then you get into talking about, so what's the cause of it, and that would be God. Yes, that's all. That's where we're at with this.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And then, so at several points you emphasized like nothing existed before a certain point, right? And nothing means nothing, right? There's not.
Nothing means not anything.
Yeah, well, but presumably we assume that God existed before that, right? I mean, so, and what sorts of things?
Yeah, we're talking about, as far as the universe goes, space, time, matter, and that sort of thing. None of that existed. There was no time, there was no space, and all the matter and the energy that make up those things, that did not exist. So yes, I would say God existed. But when we say nothing and not anything, we're talking about that as far as what we conceive of the universe.
Yeah, so I guess
It's really hard to think about not anything. It's really hard to think about not anything.
Well, especially if you're making exceptions to it, right?
With for as far as there being God.
Yeah, and
Well, yeah.
like, are there other exceptions? Like,
I don't know. I mean, so when we talked about the argument from contingency, we talked about how, the explanation of something has to either be that it exists necessarily by a necessity of its own nature, or it's contingent. It exists by nature because of an external cause. And so we talked about without appealing to God, we talked about things existing by the necessity of their own nature, how some mathematicians believe that numbers fit that description, that they exist necessarily because they're abstract objects. They don't have any sort of physical, being, and that they're just out there and they just work all the time, everywhere. And so there are some who would argue that these abstract objects like numbers exist necessarily. And so we talked about how God would also fit that. We would say that God exists by a necessity of his own nature. And then you get into, well, how does that work? And then we talked about how God is understood to be an unembodied mind, so that he doesn't have to have, there is no physical component, that sort of thing, which would require time and space and matter, so he is the exception to, not anything as far as the universe goes.
Yeah, I've heard it said that God exists outside of space and time.
Right. He transcends space and time, that sort of thing. And the way that he's able to do that is that he, as the Bible says, we're not supposed to appeal to Scripture with natural theology, but the Bible calls God spirit. And so we think of spirit as this unembodied mind who's all powerful, all knowing, and that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, we are saying that God would be the I don't know if you'd call him the exception, since he's not something physical. So he's not really the exception of,
Right.
so the universe just means physical stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the universe is just physical stuff for the most part. I mean, when we talk about the universe and everything in it, we're talking about contingent stuff, stuff that could have not existed.
By definition, it has to be something in order to measure it.
Yeah, so I would think, yes, we would say physical material. I mean, our thoughts and things like that, aren't physical and material, but they require us to have them, that sort of thing. But so yeah.
All right.
You can think of more questions. I like them, so I mean, it's hard. I probably don't have all the answers, but I'll try my best. So, but yeah, that's the understanding. That's the idea. So that before that, the Big Bang. If you can't even really say before the Big Bang, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But you know what I'm saying. Up to that point, there was not anything, and then it came into being for whatever reason.
I guess a more general concern is, I think if I were an atheist, I would think these arguments work as much against God as for God.
How so?
Well, like the arguments that things can't be infinite.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it seems like we want to make those arguments, but then make an exception for God.
Well, when we talked about an actual infinite, we're talking about an actual infinite inside the existing in reality within the
Right,
universe.
in the universe.
And we said it couldn't. And when we talk about God and we say that He's existed eternally, again, we're not saying necessarily that God is an actual infinite, that He's made up of these series of events where they just one comes after the other. We talked about how we use the word infinite to describe God as kind of a synonym to talk about His superlative attributes, such that He is just all-knowing, all-powerful. He's existed eternally. So in that case, He is infinite, but if He transcends time, then it's not the same. But atheists don't really try to make these arguments like you just said. Most atheists really understand the reason they argue so hardly for an eternal universe is because they understand the implication of that something, other than the universe had to be out there that brought the universe into existence. Now, whether that's God or something else, whatever you want to call it, you run into that problem. So I don't know of anyone who actually tries to argue, well, you talk about God this way, because God would be the exception as the way that we understand Him and the way He's kind of been, from our understanding of what God is.
There's my understanding of two concepts of infinity. The one you're talking about, God, the infinity of things, meaning 1, 2, 3, and going on. But those things are inside the universe. Those things are inside space. So going to infinity with things is different than the infinity of God.
Yes,
God is outside of space.
It would be. When we talk about infinite, we're talking about reality, and so that's the universe. And, we said that things can be potentially infinite. That is, you could potentially count to infinity. You'll never get there because you could just continue to count forever. Yeah. But an actual infinity is one where you actually have an actual infinity. It's done. You have this complete package that is called an infinity of something. And that's when we talked about all the absurdities that come along with that, and we gave the example of like Hilbert's Hotel and the guests and all that sort of stuff. So, but yeah, we are saying that God would be an exception to these things, not an exception in it's like, well, this applies to everything but God, as if God is something, because God is not, in the universe. He put Himself into time and space when He created it, and He did so much more physically when He, with the incarnation of Christ and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But God, ontologically, before God created the universe, before, when it was just God, none of these things that would apply to Him. So he is the exception in that from that perspective. There's people out there that can do a much better job than me explaining it, but it's a hard thing to think about, but I think there are good answers.
I haven't found a lot of them, but back when I was in college, there was a lot of bull sessions with people who thought they were atheists. Mm-hmm. And the discussion went on and on and on and on. And I haven't come up with an answer that is definitively persuading an atheist that there is a God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there are some atheists who have